Denise Bellil, and I'm a serenity expert. This show is called It's All Good. Lucas here for a chat because every week I have an amazing guest, people that I've encountered in my life, and I want to share their knowledge, their expertise, their wonderfulness with you. And I hope you enjoy it. Today, my guest is Regyna Curtis. She's a soul wisdom mentor. So I'll tell you a little bit about her in a second. And but before, I just want to say I call this show "It's All Good" because you all know it's my favorite cup. Eventually, I'll make some of those cup and I'll sell them because everybody should have an "It's All Good" cup. It's always the best way to wake up in the morning. If you drink coffee or water like me or a tea, it's like, hey, it's all good. It reminds you that life is beautiful, that every opportunity you have, whether you feel it's a bad thing, in the end, it might turn out to be the best thing that ever happened to you. So life is amazing and enjoy it the best you can. So that being said, I have many shows before this one. I think today is show 123 or something. So there's lots of show before this one, and you can watch them all on my YouTube channel. So if you go to, oh, that's the wrong link. Here you go, YouTube. YouTube. So youtube.com/ at Denise Bellil. And you'll see all my previous recordings are there. And you can handpick whichever one you want and discover amazing people. And the previous link was if you want to be on this show, or if you want to have a chat with me after hearing, the things we talked about with my guest Regyna and I today, then book a call with me, which is tiny.cc/talk with Denise. And that's about it. So my guest today is, as I said, is Regyna Curtis, and she's a soul wisdom mentor. So let's welcome Regyna.
Hi,
Welcome. So good to have you here today.
so good to be here. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. I feel that I've seen the work that you do, and I, I, I'm always intrigued. I found that's a little bit in the woo woo worm realms,
Yes.
and for me, and we'll talk about that in a second, and you'll see. But with a title like Soul Wisdom Mentor, like you gotta believe it's going to be a bit woo woo today. So, but I think it's good. It's good to have our mind open to see the different possibility. And obviously, there's so many people in the type of work that you do that are out there. There's got to be some validity in there and some truth. So let's find out what it's all about. So before we get started, I want to know. People want to know what's that woo woo thing, and tell me who you are, what you do, and what's at Mare Tree.
At
So wait,
Maitri.
we want to
Yeah,
know all about that before I start asking you more questions. So the floor is yours.
absolutely. Well, thank you for having me here. I'm excited to be here. And I like to say that I'm kind of like the bridge between the physical and the metaphysical. So, yes, absolutely. There's a lot that I do with the metaphysical world, yet I'm able to speak about it and help people work with the metaphysical in the physical world.
Mhm.
So it really is like, even though we're talking about spiritual things, we're doing it in our physical world. And so I help entrepreneurs bring that part of themselves, right? That internal wisdom, that inner knowing, their intuition, using things like astrology and creativity in their business to help them have work life balance. And so the word at Maitri is actually a word I created, but it is from two Sanskrit words. The first one is Atman, which means self or soul, and the second is Maitri. And Maitri is a really beautiful word. It has a lot of different ways that it can be translated, but it really is this kind of like radical acceptance of yourself, of exactly who you are, exactly how you are, through the lens of benevolence or kindness, right? So,
Mm.
really, what this word means is kindness towards yourself. And that's really what I help people do. It's the journey that I've been on throughout my entire life. And what I help people do as an entrepreneur, right? How are you kind to yourself? How do you bring your natural ways of knowing and being into your business so that your business supports you and you are supported through your business? So that's kind of what I do in a nutshell.
But how did you ever got into that type of work. I mean, it's not you.
Yeah.
I can't imagine someone just wake up one morning and say, "Oh, I'm gonna work with the soul and the creative and the stars and the metaphysical." It's like,
Yeah.
how does someone start doing that?
It wasn't on the list of things that I could choose
Yeah, it's not
from my
something you wanted
guidance
to do when you
counselor.
were 6 years old, right? It's like, I want to be a nurse, I want to be a teacher, and I'm going to work with the metaphysic world. You know?
I it's a little bit my dream that that is at some point on that checklist. However, you're very right. That I didn't wake up one day and think, oh, this is what I'm going to do when I grow up. It really was through a process of discovering myself and discovering, feeling like I didn't fit into a lot of the places that I, moved through in my life. So, I've had a career in education. I was an art teacher. I've worked in the corporate world, developing programs all over the world. I have worked in higher ed, developing teacher professional development programs and programming through departments. Um, and even though each one of those pieces had a place for me, right? It was an aspect of who I was and how I was showing up. It helped me grow and evolve in some way, and I had something to contribute. I never have before now felt like I could be all of myself in any of those places, right? So in my corporate world, I could show up as with that entrepreneurial spirit. I am a total nerd. I really love figuring out systems for things. Excel spreadsheets. I actually really love playing in Excel spreadsheets. And so I could talk that talk, I could walk that walk, I could do that, right? I could sit in a boardroom, I could travel all over the world and be corporate Regina. But in that world, it was really hard for me to show up as my creative self, right? Like sometimes
Mhm.
I dye my hair purple or whatever. I'm a very creative person, and that comes through in a physical way. So I was asked in that space to show up as an innovative person, but not as a creative person in my expression, right?
Mhm.
Only through that,
Mhm.
like, that logical expression of things or that analytical expression. But it was really hard when I would show up in, polka dots and purple hair to be respected and taken seriously in that world.
For sure.
That's just one example. As an art teacher, my creativity was celebrated, but not so much my business savvy because, oh, I was the art teacher at an elementary school. So, that's cute. And she can, play with paints and do things like that. But I had a lot of ideas for how to, create programs and connect with the community. And there was this entrepreneurial part of me that wanted to come through in that it was really hard to meld those two things in that world. Um,
Yeah.
so it really, I mean, I could sit here all day and give you a million examples of that, but it was through that process of like, okay, I fit in here, but I don't fit in. Like, I can't fully bring myself here. It doesn't fit me. And finally, it got to a point where I was like, wait, I want to bring my spiritual self, my intellectual self, my entrepreneurial self,
Your
my
creative
creative
self.
self. Like, I want to bring all of those parts of me together and stop trying to have them in separate places, which kept leading to burnout over and over again
Mhm. Mhm.
because I was
You're
trying.
unsatisfied. You always some part of you that is unsatisfied that kind of burn you out, right?
It totally does. Yeah. And no matter what one of those parts of me I put at the forefront, the rest of them eventually caught up and were like,
Mhm.
what about me? So
Mhm.
now it is my passion and my pleasure to help multi-passionate entrepreneurs bring together all of the pieces of who they are and build their business in such a way that they get to be all of those and are supported in all of those ways, by aligning that, the physical pieces and the metaphysical pieces.
Okay, well, great. So now this is pretty amazing. So we talked about so for people to know what the meat of what all she does with the word didn't come out. So how do you use astrology in your
Yeah.
work with entrepreneur and creative? So that's astrology as a whole, but then I'm sure there's a lot more than just that.
Yes.
It's not just
So
reading, you're a Scorpio, so your horoscope today is that.
no, actually, I don't use astrology in any way that, in the typical way.
Yeah.
I don't consider myself to be an astrologer, although I am very much a student of astrology. I have
Okay.
studied it myself, I use it myself. I would more so call myself an interpreter of astrological language.
Okay.
And so, what I help people do, we start at the very foundation. And the typical way that people come into astrology, at least in the West, in the Western world, not maybe not as much in other countries, but here in the US specifically, um, people will often be introduced to astrology through their horoscope, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so
Oh,
here's what.
you're a Scorpio, so what's your horoscope
Right.
today,
Yeah.
right?
You're a sun sign. And then there's like this little like fortune telling thing that you get. And it is. Okay, how do I so it would be like comparing something that's really big, right? And really distant from you, that might have a little bit of resonance with something that's going on in your world, and then trying to tell you about your world through the lens of that thing, which it's really distant. It's really like, okay, this is one part of who I am, and there's a whole lot of language and a whole lot of interpretation that has to happen in order for that to be. And there are infinite ways for that those connections, the way those things line up. So the sun is in your whatever sign today, right? That means nothing to most people.
Like
And
when I hear people say Mercury's in retrograde, I was like, what the hell does that even mean? You
right.
know?
All it means is that our from our position here on Earth, when we see Mercury and the trajectory that Mercury is moving. So, you know how have you ever sat outside at night and watched and the stars move through the sky, right?
Of course, yeah.
So,
But
you
we
can
move
actually,
through the stars, yeah. We're
yeah.
kind
So
of
they
combination of both, yeah.
a combination of both. So what is happening is we actually are moving, right?
Mhm.
The earth
Mhm.
is spinning.
Yeah.
But if you're sitting in a place where you can see, a pretty
Clear
open
sky.
sky,
Yeah.
right? You can actually put your hand like this at the horizon line, right? Where the sky meets the
Yeah.
earth. It's kind of like eye level. Um, and each hour, the stars are going to move about that much distance. Um,
Okay.
and that's just the speed at which the earth is rotating,
Yeah.
right? So every one of the planets is doing their own motion, right, in relationship to what's happening on earth. And when Mercury goes retrograde, all that means is that it appears from our perspective on earth that it's moving backwards from the position that we usually see it moving in,
Mm.
right? It's not actually, it doesn't like halt and then go into reverse and start like moving in a different direction. But there's this really beautiful storytelling that happens through the language of astrology. And unless you understand all of the pieces, like all of the characters, right, that are happening and their storylines and then the whole world that they're living in, right, then it doesn't really mean anything. So if I were to say, a character from a book that I once read, and you hadn't read the book, and I was like, oh, Emily went on a picnic with Beauregard, and you were like, that
So
means
what?
nothing to
So
me.
what?
Right. But to a person who'd read that book, they might go, oh, that was like, okay, I understand exactly what that means, right?
Mhm, mhm.
So astrology is a complex language. It is an ancient language. It was actually the Babylonians who first developed it. And it's a way of observing what's happening and how the planets appear to be moving
Mhm.
from our position on Earth. And then they noticed certain things that would happen when they would see there was like a pattern that they recognized. So this when this happens and I see these stars looking like this, I notice that this is this time of year for us, or I notice that these types of things are coming up. So I don't get into that. I know I just gave a big long explanation of it, but that's kind of really what is at the heart of astrology. What I help people do is figure out how it relates to them personally.
Okay.
And So it's your internal energy. And we use your natal chart very briefly. Basically, your natal chart is at the moment of your birth, when you came onto this planet, the location, the time, and the date that you were born. If someone were to, at that very moment, from the very position where you came into the earth, were to take a snapshot of everything that was happening in the cosmos and flatten it into a map, that's what your natal chart is. And
Okay.
then astrologers read the story. They know that the planets are different characters and they bring a different energy or a different archetype into something. I work mostly with the houses, and the houses are the different themes that you move through in each one of your cycles. So each year you move through a cycle of development. And so we take that cycle of development, we find the dates that relate to it using your natal chart, and then we look at how there's kind of like a seasonal energy. So just like there are seasons out in nature, and if I
Mm-hmm.
say to you spring or summer or fall or winter, you know kind of what that means, right? And so I relate those internal cycles to the seasons as well, so that you can understand what's happening internally using something you already have an awareness of externally. So in the spring, things are emerging, right? There's a birth or a rebirth happening. The trees are waking up, the plants are waking
Mm-hmm.
up, babies are born, like animals have a lot of babies in the spring, right? So there's this new life kind of energy. And that same thing is happening in your internal cycle. You're coming into a new awareness of yourself. There's a new way that you're identifying with yourself.
But does it mean that my spring is necessary during the spring, or my spring
No.
could be from November to
Yeah, your spring could
January?
be at any different time. And so
Okay.
this is why it's important to know when your seasons are. Because, so for instance, my seasons are very closely aligned with the seasons of nature. So,
Okay.
spring at the spring equinox, which is March 20th or March
Mm-hmm.
21st,
Mm-hmm.
that's when the external world in the northern hemisphere goes into spring. My spring starts on March 29th.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm always about a week behind when nature
The
moves into
season.
something,
Yeah.
right? And so it shows up for me as impatience, right? I can see something, I know what's coming, I can feel it coming, and I always have this like impatience of like, I can't quite get there fast enough. Um, for someone who they're, let's say they go into their spring right at the time that externally we're going into fall, there's a little bit of a like a pull, right? There's a push and pull kind of energy of like feeling like you're always a little bit upside down, or people don't quite understand exactly where you are, right? It's like, wait, this is happening externally, but I feel very different about that. So I was working with a client recently who was telling me, um, we were looking at her chart, and I said, you are in your fall when actually she was in her spring, sorry, she was in her spring when externally we're in the fall. And I was talking about how in the school year, for instance, children are going back to school
Yeah.
during the
Yeah.
fall, and it's this new beginning and it's this social time. Fall energy is very much a time of partnership. It's a time of refinement and learning. But she was in her spring, and you're in the same this doesn't change for you your whole life, right? That cycle and the dynamic of your internal cycle and your external cycle, it never changes throughout your life. So, from when you were 5 and when you're 55 and when you're 85, you'll have that same dynamic of energies playing together. Only because each time you come through this cycle, you learn something new. You get to experience it in a different way.
But why would I'm going to cut it short because we
Yeah,
don't have 2 hours.
yeah, yeah.
So but why would someone, how would that influence them in their personal and professional life? Like how does knowing that right now
Yeah.
I'm in my winter and this and that, does that benefit me in my personal or professional life? Like why would someone want to know that?
So to use that example of the person when she was in
Yeah.
school, right? She was in her spring, which means that it's a time where her energy is very internally focused. She's very much focused on who am I becoming, what do I need right now. This opposite energy of fall is very much an energy of partnership, of learning, of refining. And so she struggled in school, especially at the beginning of the year, because she wasn't really able to like come out and be social at that time. It really wasn't what her energy was needing. And
Mm-hmm.
as a business owner, it's helpful to understand. Here's a great example. We're about to come into the new year. This is quarter one, right? So we're going into Q1. There's this whole energy of like, plan for the year ahead. Make sure you've got your budget set. Make sure you've got your calendar set.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if your energy is not at that point, it's not really how your energy is designed to be focused. So that might be something that you actually plan at a different time of year. Doesn't mean that you don't still roll it out at that time of year, but the planning for it might not be the best time to do it right now,
Mm-hmm.
right? So for instance, I have never felt like, I always am excited about the new year, and I'm like, oh, the idea, the concept of like starting anew, starting fresh with things. But my energy, I can't quite get it to work until March, when I move into my spring. And
Mm-hmm.
that's when I have the energy, internal energy, to actually take action on these things. So knowing that is really helpful to me, so that I don't get burned out and think, oh, well, I'm just not capable of starting something new, or keeping intentions, or doing what I'm supposed to do at this time.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. And so, so if somebody was to go see you, so
Mhm.
what does that look like? Like, what's the process? Like, where do you start? Because, like for me, as I said, I'm curious, but it's all foreign, right? Like, if
Yeah.
I was to go see you, and why would somebody want to go see you? First, they'll have to believe a little bit in the woo woo world, right?
I mean, it's really science. So you can call it woo woo if you want to, but it is science, right? Like
Okay.
in science class, you learn about planets, right?
Okay.
The
Yeah.
moon, the moon alters the tides on Earth,
Yeah.
right? That's science.
Uh
So
huh.
there is energy there that's happening. But in science class, you don't talk about what Mercury's planetary energy is. So you can call it that if you want to, but yes, you do have to have an open mind, right? And anyone that you're working with, or any way of transforming how you're working, you do have to have an open mind about it, right?
Yeah. Of course.
So why would someone want to work with me if they are feeling like they're constantly getting burned out, and they want to show up more fully as themselves in their business and
Mm-hmm.
create systems and patterns and processes and timelines that align more with their internal energy? We just use this as a tool, right? I
Okay.
don't sit down with a magic ball and say the future tells me, or the planets tell me this. What we do is we look at dates on the calendar, and we understand how your energy is moving based on the planetary alignment, which again, it's science,
Yeah.
right? The story comes through as, that's what's considered the woo, right? There's a storyline that comes through, but I don't sit down and say, here's what, I don't tell you about you, right? I just show you where the alignments are with the energy. Here's a lower, so spring is internally focused, it's lower energy. I mean, excuse me, it's higher energy. Um, Summer is high energy, externally focused energy. Fall is externally focused, lower energy. Winter is internally focused, lower energy. You can put it in a grid, right? Low
Mm-hmm.
energy here,
Mm-hmm.
high energy here,
Mm-hmm.
internal here,
Internal,
external
external.
there, right? Then you just understand, okay, this is a season when I have lower energy and I'm internally focused. The world around me is externally focused with high energy. How do I support myself in that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I know I need more rest at that time. I know I need to take longer to move through a process, or it might take me longer to think through something. I might need to bring in more support at that time. So that is how it looks, right? We just look at, what do you need and how are you supported in your life and in your business.
Mm-hmm. So what I understand is, by understanding with the stars and the planets and where they are and which season you are at, and which you can find by doing a little bit of research on the
Yeah.
natal cycle, wherever you're whenever you're born.
Yeah,
and know what the sky look like, and then you know what's your season, then the person will be more adapt to be able to make some changes in their way of seeing their life
yeah,
when they are in those seasons according to the actual life around them.
exactly.
Okay. And so what's the best way for someone to start working with their personal season when it's completely new concept for them?
Yeah. So I do a workshop on the 28th of every month called Charting Your Course. And it's where we take that natal chart and we actually align the dates. So it really is math, right? We look at the math of it. And so if you were born, if this house starts on this day, then it equals this day of the month, right?
So
So
what is a house? Is the house the seasons? So what's
the
the difference between
house,
a house and a season? Because you did mention house earlier,
yeah,
and
it's a
now
good
you bring
question.
it back. So
So the houses are how the astrological map is made. It's just drawn. It looks like a clock, right? There's 12
yeah, yeah, I
sections.
remember seeing that. And then there's all the astrological sign around it, and then there's a
Yes.
whole bunch of other stuff.
There's a whole bunch of information in there. And most of it you don't need to know as you're just beginning to understand this. Really, the only thing you need to know is your houses. So it looks like a clock, and that's because it actually moves the same way as a clock. So it starts at the left center point on the far left in the mid center. And
So that'll be
that's
like
your,
the 3 o'clock
it is like the 9 o'clock.
or 9 o'clock. Okay.
Yeah, so like the 9 o'clock. But really, what that is, it's the horizon. So
Yeah.
it is at the moment of your birth, what was rising on the eastern horizon, I
Okay.
mean, excuse me, on the western horizon at that time. And so that is where it tells you. So at nighttime, you can see the stars, but
Mm-hmm.
in the day, the planets are still there. We just can't see them because the
Yeah.
sun is so bright, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So all that's doing is it's showing you what what constellation was actually present at that point when you were born.
Mm-hmm.
And then it moves every 2 hours because that's how long it takes. Remember I said it takes about an
Yeah,
hour
yeah, the
for,
hand. Yeah.
yeah. So it just breaks it up into 2 hours later, it was here. 2 hours later, it was here. 2 hours later, it was here.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because a day is
Okay.
24 hours. So each of those
Okay.
sections represents 2
2
hours.
hours. Okay.
Yeah. And so it shows you, okay, this is where you came. This is when you were born. You were born under that constellation. That just means that at the position you were on Earth when you were born, that was what was directly aligned with that in the
In
sky,
the
right?
sky. Yeah.
Cosmos. Um, and then your sun, it shows where was the sun at that time, where was the moon at that time,
Yeah,
where
if
was
you're born at noon, then the sun
is going
theoretically
to be
would be
right
like
hot.
right
Yeah.
up.
So
It's
I was born at 11:03, right? And so my sun sign is almost
almost up.
directly above.
Yeah.
Exactly, right? So that's why I say it's science, right? We look, it's science, it's math, it's astronomy, it's astrology. It's kind of all the same thing. And we just look at, we use those positions to help us understand on a calendar year where's that energy represented for you,
Mm-hmm.
and then we can say, okay, so this is it's kind of like being able to take an x-ray of your internal energy, right?
Okay.
So you get to take that x-ray and you can see what's going on inside using technology. We're just using a different kind of technology, right? We're using an understanding of how the patterns happen and then the storyline that goes along with that to understand what's happening internally. And then we can look at how that is either amplified, challenged, or supported internally, and then find the right tools to help you.
Okay. Okay. And so what's a house?
So a house is 2 hours of that day,
Oh,
is
a
really,
house is a 2 hours. Okay.
yeah,
It's a
it's
two
just the
hour segment.
astrological language
Yeah, yeah.
um, to say that, right? So there is a whole language of astrology.
Yeah, yeah, for
Um,
sure, for sure.
and so we just find like where those points are. It's like saying this happened at 3 o'clock in the day, right? That's 1 hour of a section. A house is just saying this is one section of your cycle. It just happens to be a year that goes through.
Okay. 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 thanks for this demystifying all of that. It makes a huge
Yeah, no
difference.
worries. I kind of joke that if I were to write an autobiography, I would call it Demystifying Magic, because I think that's what I do, right? Like, I love the mystical, I love the metaphysical, and yet I really love learning how to bring that into the physical world and explain it in a tangible way, because it really is, they're one and the same.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow, that's super cool. I'm sure a lot of people have a lot of question, and people can reach you by
Yes.
going to your website, I think.
Yes, that's perfect. So that's how you can have a connection call with me and chat with me and see how we can, work together. And also, you can find on my website there is where the Charting Your Course workshop is. So you would just go to the
Oh,
calendar.
perfect. And you have a gift for people too?
I do. So, as I said, I work with entrepreneurs. And so, what this is three business activities to focus on during each of the seasons. And I'm talking about the external seasons there. Um, we can also take this deeper. Once you know your personal seasons, you can actually align them with your internal seasons, and it's even more powerful. So, it works with both.
So how can someone discover their internal season?
So the best way, I think, is to come to the Charting Your Course workshop. There is
Which
it's
is
just,
on this website. There's a link for that,
yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly. So you just go to the calendar and it's right there.
Every 28th.
Every 28th of every month.
Okay, wow. Okay, perfect. Whether
Yeah,
it falls on a Sunday or on a Monday.
exactly. Yeah, I do it on the 28th of every month because that way it just kind of moves through different days and it
Yeah,
gives
yeah.
access to different
It
people. Yeah,
allows people to go on different time.
exactly.
And do you have one last tip that you can give people besides showing up to your workshop on the 28th of December?
Yes. So my tip is to just take it as it comes, right? Like, take it one step at a time. If astrology is something that you're super interested in, you're curious about, but you're like, I don't even know where to start. Just start with one thing, right? What's the one thing that piques your interest? And with that also, if you're noticing that your energy does feel a little bit out of alignment with what's happening in the external world, just get curious about it, notice it, and then record it, right? Like, notice, document it. And the more you document it, the more you can see how there are patterns there. And that's really
Mm.
how astrology was written in the first
Mhm,
place.
mhm.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And one last question, which
Yeah.
may be related or unrelated. What would be the difference between like what you do and also like numerology? So I know like a lot of numerology is kind of linked with the astrological symbols. And do you
So
do a little bit of numerology
I
or?
do. Yeah. They're really, honestly, so I call all of these spiritual languages, right? It's really all um, a pattern that someone noticed and documented, right? Oh, I see a correlation between when this is something that I see, I observe that this is an experience that happens with it, right? And
Mhm.
so I think what happens when something gets labeled as the woo, right? Like, it gets put into that category. Um, what happens is the correlation between those two things gets lost,
Mm.
right? I see a pattern, I notice it, I document it, and when I look at that pattern and understand that that's happening, I can then start to understand the story or the meaning of why that pattern is happening for me, right? And each person's going to have a little bit different experience with it. So, numerology is similar in the way of astrology, but they're not necessarily the same system. So, it just means that somebody noticed that when there are, I mean, they are and they aren't. In that, numerology is, you can use the symbolism of numbers to explain the energy of the years. And very quickly, I'll try to explain this quickly, but it's kind of cool because when you start to take all these different spiritual languages, numerology, astrology, like all the things, right? And you start to dive into them. I am a nerd with this. Like, I am a total nerd of anything introspective, right? Like, I
Yeah,
love
yeah.
to look at them. And so I've done a lot of research into many, 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 many different spiritual languages or forms of introspection.
Mhm.
And what I notice is that there are very clear patterns with all of them. And that's
Mm.
why they work together, because
Yeah.
it's just one person looking at it from over here, one person looking at it from over here, right? I see this part of it, you see that part of it, but really we're all just tapping into the same thing, which is there's a pattern and there's a meaning in that pattern.
The example I saw when you explained that is like blind people that try to describe an elephant by having different pieces, right?
Absolutely. Oh my God, I love that. I love that, right? Yeah. One person's like, oh no, there's this like hard
There's a
thing. And then
and then there's a tail, and then there's
somebody's like, no, it's
trunk, and
long
there's
and
the
skinny.
ears, and
Exactly. Yes, exactly. And yeah, that's exactly what it is, right? There's this universal energy, there's universal things that are happening, and different people describe it from where they are and the way they
the
understand it.
perspective. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. The
I love
elephant.
that. Yeah. This
Wonderful.
was
Well,
fun.
that's amazing. So go to, again, go to Emetry at .com. You can connect with Regyna, but also find the link for the workshop every 28th. So if you missed the one of between Christmas and New Year, say, oh no, I'm too busy during that time. Well, there's going to be one
Happening next
January and the last day of February, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's always one on the 28th. And if you miss one, there's always going to be another one. So make sure you connect with Regyna.
Thank you, Denise. This was really, really fun. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Just stay there. I'll be right back with you.
Okay.
Now we're all very versed into astrology. We know everything we need to know. No, we don't. So connect with Regyna and she can tell you more about. So we have also, I just want to remind you, oh, I don't want to click that. I want to remind you that, oh, I have a gift for you. So I have a checklist. So when we make some changes, and sometimes some changes can be difficult. It could be either the loss of a loved one, or the kids are going to school, or they get married and they leave the house, and now you're ending up with a big house that is empty, or who knows what happened. You get divorced, or maybe you have someone new in your life. Who knows? So starting over checklist is a checklist that will allow you to get some tools and ideas of how to go through these changes in your life. So I would love for you to download that. And a reminder to go to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/@ Denise Belil, to see all the previous episodes. Or if you want to get all the show notes from this episode, it's going to be in the YouTube channel. And finally, you can book a call with me if you want to know more about me, about what I do, or if you want to be on this show. Don't be afraid to book a call, and then we can talk about that. That being said, Christmas is next week, so have a wonderful week. Don't drink too much, don't party too hard, but have fun and enjoy life. And until next time, be kind to one another, and I'll see you next week.